You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome to the Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network. EJ Hradek here, and a pleasure and honor to be joined by someone I could say is a good friend in my life, Craig Button, the Director of Scouting for TSN. Craig was part of the Stanley Cup champion Dallas Stars in 1999 as scouting director there, and part of a really terrific management team led by Bob Gainey with Les Jackson and Doug Armstrong, Tim Bernhardt. I could go on, but just a lot of great people. Craig went on to become the general manager of the Calgary Flames for several seasons, did some scouting for the Leafs, and now you know him because he's in your homes on a daily basis. Wherever you look, you can find Craig Button talking about hockey, and he's here with us. So Craig, we got a crazy period of time, right? We just had the Cup final end. Congratulations to the Florida Panthers, a second straight Stanley Cup. We've got the draft coming up on Friday, and then the free agent window opens on Tuesday. So we're going to get to some of that stuff, but I do want to. I want to start with free agency, and I know we're taping this, and things can change by the minute. But I want to start with the situation in Toronto with Mitch Marner leaving. It's not often these days that a star player ends up leaving via free agency. Usually these guys, they end up staying within their groups. When you think about Marner leaving the Leafs, what do the Leafs look like in your view without Marner moving forward?
Well, you talked about the 1999 Stanley Cup champion Dallas Stars, and the player that scored the Stanley Cup winning goal was Brett Hull. Now, I'm going to rewind to 1998, the summer of 1998. We lost in the conference final to the Detroit Red Wings, who went on to win the Cup. We lost Joe Nieuwendyk in the first game of that playoffs.
Yep.
But the reason I bring up Brett Hull is Brett Hull was the face of the St. Louis Blues. He was their player. He was an all-star. He was a Hart Trophy winner. He was an 86 goal scorer and 50 goal scorer, just prolific. And at some point in time, something changed in St. Louis where they threw up their arms and they said, we can't win with Brett Hull. We have to get Brett Hull out of here. Bye-bye, Brett. Well, now I'm comparing the Mitch Marner situation to Brett Hull. And Mitch Marner, much maligned, in Toronto. And the same rhetoric I hear in Toronto is the same rhetoric we heard about Brett Hull. I mean, when we made the decision that we were going to pursue Brett Hull, we knew we had a good team. We knew that Brett Hull could add some real significant things to give our team even more strength. And he did exactly that. The interesting thing was, with all this rhetoric around Brett Hull, you can't win with him. Oh, like, I can't believe you're doing this. The number of unsolicited comments I got from people after it, and it wasn't just me, it was a lot of people you just mentioned, Bob Gainey or Doug Armstrong, Les Jackson. You'll never win with Brett Hull. You'll never win with Brett Hull. Yeah. Well, we thought we could win with Brett Hull. That's why we signed Brett Hull. Yeah, and you know what's interesting all these years later, and it's a lot of time after, I don't recall anybody coming back and going, geez, we were wrong when we told you couldn't win with Brett Hull. I think Mitch Marner can go to a team and fit in and do exactly what Brett Hull did for the Dallas Stars. Become a really good instrumental player to winning a Stanley Cup. This is a two-time first-team All-Star right wing, a Selke Trophy finalist. He is somebody that, to me, is a star. And he's proven it over the course of his career with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And like Brett Hull, I'll take my chances on Mitch Marner. You get a team that can value what he brings, support what he brings, and I think Mitch Marner will bring it.
You think, I mean, we think about all the possible landing places for Marner. It seems like, to me, looking at it, Vegas was always a player in these things. They have Jack Eichel there as a star centerman. And maybe Los Angeles, who's got a couple of guys down the middle when you think of Kopitar, Byfield, Deneau. Those are two places that he could be a good fit. Do you agree? Do you think there are other places? I'm sure there are other places. Where do you think is the best fit maybe for Marner?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a best fit. You just named two places that I think would be really, really good spots for Mitch Marner. I mean, we know what the Vegas Golden Knights are all about. They're about how do we strengthen our team, much like what we were trying to do in Dallas. We'd won the President's Trophy. We could have rested on our laurels and go, well, we lost Joe Nieuwendyk and, him back will win. We said, no, we want to be better. We want to improve in these areas. And I think that Mitch can do exactly that. you watch the Vegas Golden Knights, their offense, wasn't as strong as they'd like it to be. The LA Kings offense wasn't as strong as it could be. But then you start to look at the what I call the body of their team, the spine of their team. They got players, and Mitch can just come in and be himself, just like Brett Hull could just come in and be himself. He didn't have to wear like this burden on him and carry a burden of, I got to do everything myself. And I think that Mitch can go to those two places would be excellent fits. I'm going to throw out another one here that I'm not hesitant to do, and I think it would be a nice fit for him, and that's the Washington Capitals. Alexander Ovechkin is going to be 40 in September, and the Washington Capitals have a plethora of good young players coming through. This team is going to be really good for a number of years. Like it's really impressive how they've drafted, developed, and what their team stands for. Mitch Marner. I mean, imagine going from Alexander Ovechkin to Mitch Marner, and I think the timing might work out really nicely. So, the two teams you mentioned in the West, I think the Washington Capitals would be a really good team in the East for Mitch Marner. I know this: if I'm Chris Patrick, I'm phoning the Mitch Marner camp to find out what it takes to get him into Washington.
Yeah, that's a good one. I hadn't thought of that one. That's a really good spot. That could be a good spot for a landing spot for Marner. We're going to assume Marner is going to be out of the picture in Toronto. So then we come to John Tavares, who, into his mid-30s now, had a very good season. I believe it was 38 goals on the season. You're already losing Marner, which 102 points, a lot of offense. Where do you go with John Tavares as someone that most people feel like, he came to Toronto, childhood team and the whole pajamas, the whole thing. We know the story. But where are you on Tavares? Do you need to sign Tavares more because you're losing Marner? And, I look on the market, there's not a whole lot of guys that can come in and bring that offense to your team. You're talking about making some significant trades, if you can.
Well, you've talked about it. You have a player that you have a player that scored 38 goals. You have a player that's quality player still at this stage of his career and a quality person. So there's no question. But when I look at John Tavares and I look at what Steven Stamkos did last summer, signing for $32 million over 4 years, I believe that in John Tavares, if he hits the open market, not that he'd be surprised because his agent, Pat Brisson, is outstanding. They know the feel in the marketplace. But I think that would be in the range of term and dollars for John Tavares on the open market. So now to answer your question about Toronto, he's a really good quality player. Now I keep hearing, pay him $5 million. Like what is this, charity? Like John Tavares is charity? Like, give me a break. Like I hear common refrain. If he doesn't take $5 million, he's got to take a haircut. Take a haircut. The cap's going up to $95 million. It's going to be 140. It's going to be 113. You're not. It's not like this the COVID CBA where there was no cap increases or very $1 million a year. John Tavares is a really good player. I said this back in February. If I were the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'd try to find a way to get a deal done. If you can get him a little bit less than $8 million, if you can get him like around 7.5 or 7, and maybe it's an extra year on the term, I'd be doing all of that to keep John Tavares. But this idea that John Tavares is not a good player, just go through the stats. I'll tell anybody, just go through the stats and just count up the guys that scored more goals than John Tavares last year in the NHL, and you're not going to get very far.
Yeah, and like Brock Nelson just signed 7.5 maybe with the
bingo.
So there's a kind of guy that could tell you that number kind of tells you where Tavares could be in at a little bit less, a little bit more. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Tavares, but certainly losing Marner, which it appears they're going to lose. You lose a lot. If you lose him and Tavares, now you're talking about a lot of offense that you've got to replace. Let me ask you about some guys, potential replacements, right? There's been a lot of talk about those three players from the Florida Panthers, Bennett, Marchand, Ekland, that are free agents. It seems to me that Bennett will likely stay in Florida. Now, again, we'll see how it plays out. July 1st is the free agent day. Last year, Florida went right to the end with Sam Reinhart. They ended up getting a deal done there. But let's focus on Aaron Ekblad and Brad Marchand. Are these players, do you think, that would make sense for Toronto?
listen, Stanley Cup was handed out. If I'm Brad Treliving, I started my phone calls the next day, and I would have a timer. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm phoning the representatives. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm phoning the representatives, and I'm making one call before I go to bed to just let them know we're interested. Obviously, we know that the window, but free agency talks are on, and you can express, hey, listen, phone us, let us know, we want to do it. Brad Treliving, I mean, it's going to be a phrase that's going to live for a number of years now. We need to change the DNA. Aaron Ekblad and Brad Marchand changed the DNA. So if you're going to make that comment, I don't want to hear it anymore. Like, let's see what your actions say. Aaron Ekblad and Brad Marchand changed the DNA of the Toronto Maple Leafs. They come in here, obviously, with winning pedigree, but they come in here with attitude. And that attitude is, we're not accepting, just being a good regular season team. We're not going to celebrate finishing first in our division. Been there, done that. We didn't win. They were third. They were in third place in their division this year in the Atlantic Conference, behind Tampa Bay and behind Toronto. They have to go on the road for every series, and they won. Attitude, how they approach playing the game. They take no prisoners, and that's what Toronto needs more of. They need more of that attitude. So, what better way to go get that attitude than bring players that play with that attitude? I'm Brad Treliving, and EJ, I'll tell you where else I'm at too. I'm overpaying for that. Because I'm not just ready to overpay for that. It's because what it means for Nylander and Matthews and the other group of young players. I'm getting a return on my investment for those guys. So my $13.25 million for Matthews now has a greater return because I got those guys in there. Same with Nylander. Same with the younger guys that are going to be there, the Matthew Knies and those guys. That's what so I'm ready to overpay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, listen, you get to this time of year, you usually are overpaying, and but to your point, it's something that the Toronto Maple Leafs are trying to get to, and it seems like you're right; those guys would bring some of that to the table. Let me ask you about Matthew Knies, right? Matthew Knies, he's a restricted free agent. I would have thought maybe this would be done by now. I guess these things go back and forth. Where do you think Matthew Knies comes in at this point? In terms of, if you were in that seat, if you were Brad Treliving, what would you be trying to accomplish in a negotiation with Matthew Knies at this point?
The Matt Boldy contract, full stop. Mm-hmm. That's right where I'm going. Matt Boldy, you look at the contract he signed, the $7 million over term, and Matt Boldy's a really good player for the Minnesota Wild. That's where I'm at with Matthew Knies, and that's what I'm trying to get done, and I'm trying to get it done on an 8-year deal. Matthew Knies is somebody that brings a lot of different elements and attributes to your team. He can score, he's physical, he's heavy, he's hard. And so to me, when I look at players around the league and I look at players in a similar age group, and you look at comparables at that time, Matthew Boldy's the guy that comes to mind for me. And that's what I would be doing with Matthew Knies. Now, Brad Treliving has experience here because when he was in Calgary and Matthew Tkachuk was there, they asked for the Leon Draisaitl contract. And if you go back and look at where that was at the time, that was the comparable. And they fought it and fought it and fought it. And when Matthew Tkachuk had his chance, after feeling, quite frankly, disrespected, he said bye-bye. Brad Treliving should take that experience and learn from it.
Yeah, well, that certainly was an experience he does not want to relive in Toronto for sure. Suppose that Knies camp comes back and says, "Listen, we're more comfortable on a shorter deal." I mean, how do you handle that? That seems to be something that we've seen over the last several years. The cap is going up down the road. We don't know how much more it'll go up after these next couple of years. Suppose the Knies camp comes at you and says, "We want to go in a shorter direction here."
Yeah, and you're right, EJ. Players do not want to leave money on the table. And with the cap, we just mentioned the cap, 95, 104, 113. So short-term deals, the longer-term deals made a lot of sense because they all knew it was going to be a flat cap and it wasn't going to go up. So we'll get our money. We'll make sure we have our money going forward. But now you might be leaving money on the table. I think it becomes part of the communication and part of the negotiation. Again, I just mentioned about overpaying for Ekblad and overpaying for Marchand to change the DNA. Well, if you recognize where the cap not recognize where it is going to be, I think you can make an adjustment with Matthew Knies and his representatives to to keep in mind, we're not going to have you leave money on the table. We're going to pay you a little bit more now, and that will reflect your value later on when you might get a little bit less towards the end of a contract, but we're not going to leave you that far short. And let's use Brad Marchand as an example. Brad Marchand signed that contract, right? And but as the money went up, Brad Marchand was vastly underpaid.
Yeah.
And players don't want to be in that spot. So I think there's a way to get through that. But if it's a short-term deal, I'm not so sure if I'm Brad Treliving that I'm just going, okay, fine, short-term, we're doing 1 year.
Yeah. That'd be bold.
Yeah, but what's wrong? But again, like the agent and the player wants that, right? They want to make sure. Well, I'm Brad Treliving. We go, well, I want to make sure that what I'm paying you is good. So if you want to make sure you don't leave money on the table, I want to make sure I don't give you too much money on the table. Mm-hmm. So I'd there's a way to go back and forth on this. I'm just telling you what I would do. Good, that's fine. Short term, 1 year. Here we go.
Hey, speaking of contracts that we're going to be thinking about over the next little bit, Connor McDavid hits that window on July 1 where he's one more year on his deal in Edmonton. Just give me your thoughts on what happened to the Oilers in the final, because obviously they ran into a Florida team that just seemed to be getting better and better and better as the playoffs went on. They were so good on the road. They're deep, 3 lines deep. I mean, they're great on defense, Hall of Fame goalie, great management, great coaching. I mean, they've had it all. Good for the Florida Panthers. I mean, I probably underestimated them a little bit going into the playoffs, but they proved to be terrific again. But give me your thoughts on the Oilers, kind of what, coming out of that final, the McDavid situation is going to unfold moving forward. Where do the Oilers go from here? Because going to the final 2 straight years and not winning is not something we see often. I mean, the last time I think it happened was with the Bruins back in the late 70s.
77 and 78 versus the Montreal Canadiens, back-to-back Stanley Cup final appearances for the Bruins. What I would say about the Edmonton Oilers, I mean, we know 97 and 29 are great players. And I believe that they overperform on a nightly basis for that franchise. I thought that the Edmonton Oilers were first-round fodder this year against the LA Kings. And through 7 of the first 8 periods, it looked like they were first round fodder, like they were not in the series. Then they found their way, and McDavid and Draisaitl were a big part of that. And I give a lot of credit to a team that can find its way, but they did that. But they did it on the backs of 97, 29. Certainly, Evan Bouchard was terrific. So when you ask me about the Edmonton Oilers, I think you got to be careful about saying, well, we were close. They weren't close against Florida. In 6 games at the end of regulation, Edmonton was never leading. They needed 2 overtime wins, and in both those overtime wins, they needed Florida to kind of collapse a little bit. 2-goal lead in game 1, 3-goal lead in game 4, and in games 3, 5, and 6, it wasn't even close. It wasn't even a contest. Yeah. So now you ran up against LA. You better be careful about understanding where you're at. Vegas just didn't have enough juice this year. They're going to be better, right? And the Dallas Stars, they appear to be a team that's going to take a step back. But there's other teams that are taking a step forward. And I think for the Edmonton Oilers, you better be really careful about falling in love with the fact that you went to the final. I don't think they're deep enough. I don't think up front, I don't think they're deep enough. And I don't think the goaltending's good enough. And I think that those are the 2 areas they got to look at. In 1991, EJ, I was with the Minnesota North Stars. Bob Gainey was our coach. Bob Clark was our manager. And we went to the Stanley Cup final. I call it the Magical Mystery Tour. It was magic. Well, it's magical. It's magical when anytime you can go that deep in the playoffs and get to play for the Stanley Cup in the final. It was a mystery because we were such a bad team through the middle of February. And then we found that magic. But I remember at the end of we were having meetings after we'd lost, and we're talking about everybody's around the table. Well, we didn't have this, we didn't have that, and finally Bob Gainey just kind of puts his finger up in his hand and gets everybody's attention, and finally he gets to speak, and he says, "Listen, we better quickly forget about how we fell short against the Pittsburgh Penguins, because we're not a good enough team. We got to be a better team in the regular season. And if we're not a better team in the regular season, we can't count on getting back here. And I think that those were very wise words from a very wise man who understood the challenges. And I think that's the advice I would give to the Edmonton Oilers. Do not be fooled by the fact you got to the Stanley Cup final. You know, a lot of things have to go right for you. A lot of things, as we know, like the health and everything that goes with it. But some things worked in their favor with other teams not playing as well as they could. I mean, I still believe the LA Kings, one of the worst coaching performances I've seen in the playoffs in a long time. And I know people go, well, sorry, like, you know, what do you do when a goaltender has a bad, like when Connor Hellebuck wasn't playing good in that first round series on the road versus St. Louis, what we're going to say that it wasn't good, that it was good. It wasn't good. And so then the Vegas Golden Knights, we know the Vegas Golden Knights are never complacent, ever. No. Oilers better guard against that. Minnesota Wild are on the rise. Colorado's angry. Winnipeg's angry. There's teams out there that are hungry. St. Louis feels now that they can move forward. Don't fall in love with the fact that you got to the final for a second consecutive season. That would be my advice.
Craig, McDavid, I mean, all arrows or all indication, we think Connor McDavid will stay an Oiler. I mean, Leon Draisaitl signed a long-term deal. I mean, we could make the assumption maybe that they would have had a conversation about Connor's plans. His former agent is the CEO of hockey ops there, and Jeff Jackson. So, I mean, is there any chance in your mind, I mean, McDavid would leave? I mean, it's a hard question to answer. We can't get into somebody's mind and in their heart, but he's such a great player. If he were ever to get on the market, look out.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Look out. Like, I mean, again, like I know teams last year were maneuvering to give themselves cap space in case Leon Draisaitl was not going to sign long term, and they were going to have to potentially trade him. Teams were phoning and saying, "Hey, listen, you know, we don't know what's going to happen, but if something happens, we want a phone call." Connor McDavid has lived his entire adult life in Edmonton. He is the Edmonton Oilers. He's the captain. He's the leader. He's the best player on the planet. And to me, I have zero concern about him not being an Edmonton Oiler for the foreseeable future. Now, what does that what does that mean? I'm a big believer, again, I'm going to go back to the don't leave money on the table. I think Connor McDavid can do a 4-year deal, much like Austin Matthews did in Toronto. And whatever that, if that number is 16 and a half, 17 million, that's 4 years. And then when the cap's up again at the end of the 4 years, he can max out at the over 20 million, 21, 22, whatever it is at that point in time. And I think that way Connor McDavid doesn't leave money on the table, because Connor McDavid right now is underpaid. And the player Bob Goodenow reminded me of this many times. He said, players don't want to be paid 1 more cent than they're worth or 1 cent less than they're worth. Yeah. Connor McDavid is being paid a lot of cents less than he's worth.
Yeah, I would certainly agree and concur with you on that. Let's get to the draft quick, as we got a few more minutes here. The draft is something, obviously, you've been a big part of it for many, many years. You've been in those rooms. You've been at the rinks. You're still going to the rinks. You do an unbelievable job for TSN in your role as director of scouting, which I think is something that's really unique in our business, to have someone with your experience and going to all these events and going into those different rinks and in parts of the U.S., parts of Canada, all around the globe, really monitoring players. We get to the draft this year. It looks like Matthew Schaefer is going to be the first overall pick. The Islanders have that pick. Just give the viewers a little idea about this young guy, because I've been just watching a lot of tape on him over the last 36 hours. And wow, I have been just so impressed with him, not as a player and a defenseman, but just as a young man. He's been just a really impressive young guy.
Well, if you go back and look at his resume, he's been a leader of every team he's ever been on. And that speaks volumes to your point about him as a person and as a leader. As a player, I see a defenseman that can control the game. And what does that mean? That means it doesn't matter what the situation is when he's on the ice. Penalty killing, power play, offense, defense, transition, physical, hard, fast, defensive, whatever it may be, he controls the game. And those types of players are rare. To me, he's a clear-cut number 1 defenseman. I think he'll absolutely be in Norris conversations and winning Norris Trophy. I've used Drew Doughty as a comparison. the type of player that Matthew Schaefer is. And so what all Drew Doughty does is win gold medals, win Stanley Cups, play 25 minutes a night, help you win. And that to me is Matthew Schaefer. I don't think there's a better player than Matthew Schaefer in this draft. I just don't. And, the Islanders are picking one. I think you and me were talking about it the other day. You did some work on it. Dennis Potvin in 1973 was the first overall pick to the New York Islanders. And we know that he was the captain of 4 Stanley Cup winning teams. I think Matthew Schaefer, when you look at his winning pedigree, you look at his style of game, the Islanders have a Dennis Potvin in the making.
Yeah, he's just, like I said, fun to watch on tape. It's going to be interesting to watch his career move forward. It was sad this year. He ended up getting injured in the World Juniors, crashing into that net, which is still kind of crazy to me that happened.
I got to tell you a funny story. His dad, Todd, who's a real character. So Matthew was in the TSN studio, and James Duthie did an interview with him. And so Todd, we were asking Matthew about interview questions, and Matthew was sharing some different interview questions he had. What's your favorite animal? What kind of animal would you be? Anything. So then Todd said, people were asking him about the, how's the collarbone and everything, right? And Todd, his dad, said, he goes, they should have been asking him about his eyesight. He goes, he ran into that net that hasn't moved for 80 years. So you have such a well-grounded young man in Matthew Schaefer. I mean, he lost his mother Jenny in the winter of 2024, and Matthew said that he wouldn't be the person he is today without the life experiences he's had, both good and sad. And I think that I always say this, EJ. You can look at a young man or young person, whether it be a young woman or a young guy, and you see something, you go, good parenting. And you can look at good parents and you can say, we'll have good kids. And I think that certainly applies here with Matthew Schaefer.
All right. Last thing on the draft. I mean, you've been working, trying to figure out these players 16, 17, 18 years old. Really a tough assignment, I think, for scouts, forever, in hockey. So you've had a great experience with this. You've seen all the different draft classes. I know, it's early in the game, but when you look at this draft class, what do you think we'll be saying about this draft class in another 10 years? Do you think there are a lot of players that are going to be helpful players in the National Hockey League, or is it maybe a draft class that isn't quite up to the standards of maybe just the average draft class?
Yeah, well, I just talked about Matthew Schaefer as a number one defenseman that can win Norris trophies. How many players in any draft come out and be a Norris Trophy candidate, let alone a winner and a number one? Yeah. Not very many. I think so much of drafts are predicated on the top end. Oh, there's a Connor McDavid here. Oh, there's an Austin Matthews. Oh, there's a Connor Bedard or a Macklin Celebrini. Okay, that's one player, EJ. It's one player. And those players go number one, right? So what? Should every other team just go, well, there's no Macklin Celebrini here. Have all our picks. Here, take all our picks. We're not going to pick. Here's what I know. And I'm going to give you the specific numbers. 45 players, approximately 45 players from this draft are going to play 350 games or more in the NHL. That's a fact. I'd love to tell you who they are. I'd love to tell you but EJ, 8 players that are drafted in the first round will not have any NHL career of any significance. I'd love to tell you who they are. Okay, that's what the numbers tell you. There will be players drafted after the second round that will emerge as stars. Jesper Bratt was in the 6th round. Jamie Benn was in the 5th round. We see it time and time and time again. That's going to happen here. And the scouts are watching the players that are the very best at the levels below them. And when I say 8 players drafted in the first round, approximately, will not have an NHL career of any significance, what do you think? The scouts are going, we're going to draft this guy. We don't think he's going to make it. Every NHL team thinks that they're drafting a player that's going to make it. Part of this is projecting where they're going to be at in 4 or 5 years' time, how they adapt and everything. And that's what I know. I think there's lots of good players in this draft. I think the draft goes deep. I think it goes well into the second round. I think there's players after the second round that are good, that I like, that I think have potential. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of it is what's showing up right now. I'll give you an example. Henry Bustevich, he plays for the London Knights. He could go in the first round. He could go in the second round. Really good. If his skating was better, he'd be a top 10 pick. But his skating isn't better. So now you got to project where he's at, how much his skating can improve, and then if it does, and that's where you go. We drafted Jason Botterill in Dallas in 1994. Now, Jason's mother was an Olympic speed skater. And nobody I was ever around in my career worked as hard on his skating as Jason Botterill did. So we projected that the skating would get better. It didn't. Is that Jason's fault? No. I think Jason maxed out in doing everything he possibly could to be an NHL player. He never cheated the organization he was with. He never cheated a team. He never cheated himself, which is the most important thing. So Jason Botterill never failed. We thought his skating would improve. It didn't. That's on us. That was on us. Yeah. And so I give you Henry Brustevich, good puck handler, good competitor, smart, and that's what you get. So could he emerge in a couple of years and you go, wow, geez, how did he go at that point in the draft? It's for those reasons. In the top 10 this year, lots of centers. Last year's draft, the first 12 guys, 6 of them were defensemen. Top 10, 12 this year are going to be centers. That's the specifics of this year's draft. Lots of good players, lots of edgy players. Brady Martin, Porter Martone, I'm talking about you. Keyshawn Aitchison, I'm talking about you. We just watched the Florida Panthers wreak havoc, be nasty, and make no apologies. Those 3 players I just named, I want them on my team if I'm competing for a Stanley Cup.
Hey, real quick, do those 3 guys benefit because of what the Florida Panthers just did in the eyes of teams and scouts?
Absolutely. I think there's 2 things that happen. Players like that benefit, and players that might be a little bit smaller tend to get knocked down a little bit.
Yeah,
because of what they just watch. Recency bias, recency viewing.
Yep.
That's what happens, EJ.
No question.
That's what happens. But again, I asked myself this question. I did it when I was with teams. Teams do it. Does this player help you win? I'm not here. You're looking at top players, and you look at the skating, you look at this and everything. Do they help you win? And if the answer is, if you're not sure, or the answer is no, just pass them by.
Move on. Well, with that, we will move on. But Craig, thanks so much for the time. I know it's a busy time for you with the draft coming up. Really looking forward to it out in LA. Different kind of draft this year. Not so excited about that. We'll see how it plays out. But thanks so much for the time, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks.
All right. You've been watching the Toronto Sports Rush right here on the Bet Rivers Network.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.